just to continue that rough note of this new tangential aspect of critique, is that so the hypocrisy is so their victory is that they are dominating, their mark, their ideological mark is being left as an imprint on the world, which, you know, has its own flavor of being different, because it is them getting away with their double standard, which is seen as asymmetrically proportional to the double standard of privilege, which their counter privilege is the counterbalance for, the counterweight of. Now, I mean, it's funny that they aren't susceptible to their own critique, that their ideological privilege is just as toxic as the privilege that they are trying to balance out. And in fact, the only way that they can balance out their privilege is by collective punishment, which is, you know, it offends everything. You know, it offends reason itself, which is why they've also fought reason. You know, they say that reason itself is part of the patriarchy. You know, and so the only thing that you're left with is a kind of fascistic, perpetual war against identity factions, and so you're left with the exposition of the fundamental belief structure that underpins all of this, which is that essentially the only thing of value in the world is your identity faction, is your identity group, is your kind of racialist value system, and everyone is just an insect representation or a piece of that group integrity. And so there is only group integrity, there is no individual integrity. It's kind of, I don't think it has anything to do with liberalism, because it's liberalism mixed in with a kind of religion around identity, which is already presumed to be essentially collectivist in its descriptive flavor. So it doesn't make sense, I think, to compare the so-called individual with the collective, because it is actually the concept of the individual with an innate collective essential grounding built into it, which is essentially a racialist at its core. So, you know, there is a cryptic racism at the heart of this, you know. And so the problem is that when you divide things into a binary of in-group sympathy or in-group versus out-group, or in-group our collective versus that collective, it's too easy, because you've got a pressure valve for every thing. You never have to be humble. You never have to take on actual criticism, because you can just say, well, I wouldn't even have to face this criticism if we didn't have a mixture of these different collectives talking to one another or being able to impact one another. So it's like you don't have to think about anything. You don't have to know anything. You just have to know that consequentially my identity feels under siege, and therefore the proximate solution is to insulate that identity and get an equality of outcome for that identity, and then afterwards we can have a discussion. But, you know, that discussion essentially never comes, because that form of solution never gets to the break-even point. It is incapable of getting to the break-even point because it's incapable of understanding the world rationally. It's incapable of bearing any accountability or responsibility. The only responsibility it has is for this deformed form of integrity. You know, that there must be some kind of equality of racialist pride between the groups. And so, you know, like, you know, fat chance of that project you know, actually being able to authentically transform anything in any kind of practical way, except by some kind of top-down interventionism and disgusting.
Thing.
Yeah.
Either you stay here or go up. Now you open that one in there. Might as well use for two people.
And so the hypocrisy in the whole kind of counterfeit integrity, which is forced, other people are forced into having to give it equal time and respect it, is the model of their kind of subversive pushback mentality. So like everything they do is under the cover that it's just pushback, it's just equal time, it's some kind of banal equality of thinking. Some kind of thing that the public square must evenly be distributed between the various forms of fascistic domination, which and so when you've got this binary that it's something has to have systematic, something has to take systematic accountability for delivering things to identity groups, because identity is essentially the only entity which is essentially true. This is the foundation of their philosophical thinking. When that is their how they proceed to think about anything, and at the first principles analysis, they are in fact doing the same thing that the traditionalists have always done in some sense. So it is more like the kind of the completely the shortcut of we're not going to do that because we have this identity, so we don't have to secularly be convincing or lay down something. We just have to say, oh well, it belongs to us, or something like that, which is of course always immune to it's immune to reason itself, and it's so I mean, this is why it loves to antagonize traditionalism, because it uses that as the kind of excuse to indulge in the same kind of hypocrisy. So it's part of the whole useful idiot campaign. So on some level, their argument is, oh, we're just engaging in the same kind of argument. We just want the same equal time that the traditionalists get, while at the same time making a case that their moral authority is better, essentially because it is the underdog and it hasn't had a chance to run things and to rule things. And as soon as it gets into any kind of power,
Go the other way, go the other way, go the other way. Push them over here. Okay.
at least traditionalism, let's just say, has always been like a low-level reactionary immune response on some level. That and generally in the West, it's always been superseded by structures that are defined by reason and have reason as their content, and are therefore adaptable in some sense, or at least.
Worst one we can get.
So I mean, the biggest metaphor I would say for this kind of ideological perniciousness is really a kind of autoimmune disease. You know, it's kind of the
I think it actually might be faster to go.
it's almost probably like I mean, I don't actually know that too much about biology, but I imagine there's some kind of autoimmune conditions which are kind of like sympathetic autoimmune conditions, that there is like some kind of autoimmune pathology which then sympathetically precipitates a further secondary autoimmune condition which is, you know, even worse in some sense. And so that's the kind of strategy, you know, that it really does play havoc with the Jungian principle that what you resist persists, because it just sort of manufactures resistance that then it uses to promote itself.
Dominated minions deal 30% increased damage. What is that?
Fireball has a 30% chance to ignite, plus 30%.
What is this dominated minion? I never heard of this.